What if I told you that the war on terror was, in part, created by the very agency meant to protect the United States? The CIA's secret operations have shaped modern terrorism in ways you wouldn't believe. Since its creation in 1947, the CIA has been the shadow force behind global conflicts, operating in secrecy to advance US interests. From overthrowing governments in Iran 1953 and Chile 1973 to arming rebel groups in Afghanistan during the Cold War, the agency has shaped world history in ways most people never realized. While its mission was to fight communism and protect democracy,
You fail to meet their commitments against outside communist penetration. Then I want it clearly understood that this government will not.
many of its covert operations had unintended consequences, often leading to chaos, dictatorships, and even the rise of extremist groups. But was it all necessary, or a dangerous game of power that spiraled out of control? The CIA was created to fight communism and protect US interests, but in doing so, it often played a dangerous game of power. Through classified operations, secret funding, and backdoor deals, the agency helped shape conflicts across the world. From arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to toppling governments in Latin America and the Middle East, many of its actions had unintended consequences, some of which led to the rise of terrorist organizations that still haunt the world today. But how did these covert missions spiral out of control? The truth is more shocking than you think. Cold War. During the Soviet-Afghan War, 1979-1989, the CIA launched Operation Cyclone.
1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The goal was to prop up the faltering communist government in
One of the most expensive covert missions in history. Billions of dollars in weapons and training were funneled to the Mujahideen, Afghan rebels fighting against Soviet forces. At the time, the US hailed them as freedom fighters, using them as a tool to weaken the USSR. But once the war ended, many of these fighters, including Osama bin Laden, turned their weapons against the West. The same CIA-backed insurgents would later evolve into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, proving that yesterday's allies can become tomorrow's enemies. The Iran-Contra affair was one of the most shocking scandals in US history, where the government secretly sold weapons to Iran despite an arms embargo.
States is targeting Iran's drone and weapons.
The U.S. will deploy additional troops from Iran.
And used the profits to fund rebel groups in Latin America. The CIA-backed Contras in Nicaragua were fighting against a socialist government, but their brutal tactics led to accusations of war crimes and terrorism. This covert operation exposed how the US was willing to break its own laws to manipulate global conflicts.
My name is Oliver North, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps.
Setting a dangerous precedent for backdoor deals with extremist forces, a strategy that would come back to haunt them in the future. After the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, the once united Mujahideen splintered into rival factions. Among them was Osama bin Laden, a former US ally who turned against America, accusing it of occupying Muslim lands. His group, Al-Qaeda, would later orchestrate the 9/11 attacks, leading to the US war on terror. Then came the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which toppled Saddam Hussein but left a power vacuum. This chaos gave rise to ISIS, a group even more extreme, proving once again that US interventions often create unintended and long-lasting consequences. Modern impacts. In the aftermath of 9/11, the US launched drone wars across the Middle East, targeting suspected terrorists with precision strikes. While these operations eliminated high-profile enemies, they also killed civilians, fueling anti-American sentiment and pushing more recruits toward extremist groups. At the same time, the CIA continued to arm and fund rebel groups from Libya to Syria, hoping to overthrow hostile regimes. But as history has shown, many of these US-backed fighters later turned against their sponsors, proving that covert interventions often create more enemies than solutions. Western intervention in the Middle East has often been framed as a fight for democracy.
Democracy needs champions. Democracy is hard. We all know that. Global community for democracy.
But for many in the region, it tells a different story. Invasions, drone strikes, and regime changes have left countries in chaos, fueling the narrative that the West seeks to control, not liberate. Groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS use these interventions as propaganda, portraying themselves as defenders against foreign occupation. Every airstrike, every civilian casualty, and every failed US-backed regime only strengthens their recruitment efforts, proving that military power alone can't stop extremism. It often fuels it. Did the CIA's past mistakes make the world more dangerous, or were they necessary moves in a global power struggle? From arming the Mujahideen to toppling governments and funding rebel groups, the agency's covert operations have shaped modern conflicts in ways few could have predicted. While some argue these actions protected US interests,
practice of the lack of amphibious ship availability, which is
others believe they created the very enemies the US now fight. So, was it strategic genius or reckless intervention? CIA's secret wars may have helped the US win battles, but they also planted the seeds of modern terrorism with unintended consequences that still shape global conflicts. From arming insurgents to toppling governments, these covert actions often created more enemies than solutions. But was it all necessary to maintain US power, or was it a reckless strategy that made the world more dangerous?